Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Gauravani Vicharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskadyade Siddharne. Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 2, verse number 64. Raga Dvesha Vimukhtaistu Vishayan Indriyastaran Amavaisharvidayatma Prasadam Adigachati. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. But a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through regular principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. Purport. It is already explained that one may externally control the senses by some artificial process. But unless the senses are engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is every chance of a fall. Though the person in full Krishna consciousness may apparently be on the central plane, because of his being Krishna conscious, he has no attachment to sensual activities. But the Krishna conscious person is concerned only with the satisfaction of Krishna and nothing else. Therefore, he is transcendental to all attachment and detachment. Krishna wants the devotee can do anything which is ordinarily undesirable, and if Krishna does not want, he shall not do that which he should have ordinarily done for his own satisfaction. Therefore, to act or not to act is within his control, because he acts only under the direction of Krishna. This consciousness is the causeless mercy of the Lord, which the devotee can achieve in spite of his being attached to the central platform. So, Raga Dvesha Vimukhtaistu Vishayanindriyastaran Amavaisharvidayatma Prasadam Adhigachati. But a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through regular principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. Om Agyanatmanandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksura Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. This verse is a continuation of what Krishna said, especially the immediate last two verses of the Bhagavad Gita before this one. That Dhyayato Vishayam Pumsam Sangasteshu Bhajayate Sangas Sanjayate Kama Kama Krodo Bhajayate. That while contemplating the objects of the senses, person develops attachment for them. From such attachment, lust comes. From lust comes anger. From anger comes bewilderment or illusion. And from illusion comes forgetfulness. From forgetfulness comes loss of intelligence. When there's loss of intelligence, one is engaged in materialistic activities. Krodha bhavati samoha, samoha smriti vibramsat, smriti bramsat buddhinashat pranashati. So here Prabhupada is explaining, or Krishna is explaining, that we have to follow a process to get free from these, from the influence of the material modes of material nature, from especially lust, anger, and greed, in order to obtain the complete mercy of Krishna. In other words, Krishna would like to give us his mercy, but we have to develop the desire to obtain it. And as long as our desires are some for Krishna and some for our senses and mental ideas, then Krishna will not give us his full mercy. Of course, Krishna will explain in the last verses of this chapter what the process is. Namely, apuryamanam achala pratishtam samudram apa pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sashantim atnoti nakama kami. Person who's not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is always being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desire. So that's called shanti, peaceful. In other words, when material desires flow through the mind and we become disturbed by them, then to one extent or another we become implicated by them. Disturbed could mean just that we're somewhat attached to them, or we hanker for them, or we become frustrated over them, or we work to fulfill them. We desire it to fulfill our desires. So in such a state, one is not, then Maya takes away our consciousness of Krishna. In other words, either we're fixed in Krishna consciousness to one degree or another, or we're in material consciousness. We can't be in material consciousness and at the same time be fully in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, Krishna advises, Vihaya kamyak sarvam pumam chariti nispriha, nirmamo nirahankara sashantimadhigachiti. Person who lives free from desires, gives up to all desires of sense gratification, who doesn't consider himself a proprietor, and is devoid of false ego, he alone can achieve real peace. Therefore, we're trying to find the method so that we can actually fix our consciousness in Krishna consciousness so that, as Krishna says, we can get a higher taste. In other words, if we're actually thinking about Krishna and experiencing his forms, his names, his qualities, his forms, his associates, and their pastimes, then they're all of the nature of eternal bliss in full consciousness. So how to come to that platform? Well, our acharyas have advised us that we have to start from the basis. Although our aim is transcendental love and a higher taste, to achieve it requires some sacrifice. As Krishna says, yad taragre vishamiva harinami ritopamam tat sukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. That which in the beginning may be bitter like poison, and the end is like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. So we have to be prepared to execute some kind of tapasya, or austerity. And the aim of the austerity is not simply to be austere, but the aim of the austerity is that while we're performing the austerity, we can practice fixing our mind upon Krishna, in spite of the fact that there may be some inconvenience. For example, fasting to one degree or another on Ekadasi doesn't mean simply to meditate on fasting. It means to increase our hearing and chanting about Krishna so that while we're going through some austerity, we can actually focus the mind more directly on Krishna. So how to do that? It is always advised that we keep association with devotees who are also practicing Krishna consciousness, but under the guidance and direction of the superior devotees, especially the Acharya. Therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami has told us in the Nectar of Instruction, Tanama Rupacharitadi Sukirtananu Smrityo Kramena Rasanamanasi Niyoja Tishtan Vraje Tananugagami Kalamnaya Akilam Itapidesha Sara. That he's given us that the essence of all advice is that one should engage oneself 24 hours a day in nicely hearing and chanting about the Lord's divine name, transcendental form, quality, and pastimes. In this way, gradually engage the tongue and mind. One should live in Vrindavan and serve Krishna under the guidance of the Lord's devotees, and one should follow in the footsteps of the Lord's beloved devotees who are deeply attached to his devotional service. So the beginning is to accept a role model, because everyone needs a authority. Everyone needs a leader. When Prabhupada was speaking to Professor Kataski, although he could not act in Moscow, although he could not convince Professor Kataski even about the transmigration of the soul, or even about the necessity of establishing a society based upon Brahminical leadership, still Prabhupada had to conclude that essentially everyone has the same philosophy. That philosophy is that we have to accept a leader and follow them. That you've chosen Lenin as your leader, and we've chosen Krishna as our leader. So you will follow Professor Lenin, and wherever he went, that's where you're going to go. And we've accepted Krishna as our leader, and where he goes, that's where we'll go also. So we have to decide who actually is our leader, who is the standard. Now, the standard, according to Srila Prabhupada in his books, is that one has to accept a Mahabhagavat, such as Srila Prabhupada, an Acharya, and follow them. And the symptoms of Acharya is that the devotee is 100% engaged in Krishna's service. That's the Acharya. And that service is not only the practice of sadhana bhakti, but it's also the practice of distributing Krishna consciousness to others. For that reason, Advaita Acharya was given the title of Acharya, because he was Bhakti Samshanat. His only business was to spread Krishna consciousness. And by doing so, of course, he was also fully conscious of Krishna. Therefore, in our society, instead of trying to become a great devotee, an Acharya, a leader, our business is to become a servant of a great devotee, of a great leader. And by doing so, one becomes eligible gradually to become a servant leader also of others. For instance, Prabhupada often wrote that actually when he accepts disciples, he's not accepting disciples, he is accepting masters. But his spiritual master and Krishna have sent them so that he can train them to become devotees of Krishna. In other words, the spiritual master never accepts himself, or any devotee who's advanced should not accept himself as anyone's master, but he accepts himself as everyone's servant in order to train them to become also servants of Krishna. So the most perfect example of that is Srila Prabhupada. That although he acted as an Acharya, but at the same time, he was able to chant Hare Krishna like a child calling for his mother. He was not falsely in the role of being anyone's master. He was in the role of being his spiritual master's servant. And that's why he did everything. And in such a consciousness, he was able to maintain his Krishna consciousness in spite of any circumstance. Now, we ourselves, if we were fully conscious of Krishna, we wouldn't need sadhana bhakti in order to fix our minds on Krishna. But until we become free from our anarthas, there's a process by which we can actually remain in Krishna consciousness in spite of any circumstance. And if one can come to that platform through practice, suitable practice, as Krishna says, suitable practice and detachment. Because Arjuna said that his problem is his mind. And Prabhupada writes in the verse that one has to elevate himself by his own mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. So Prabhupada, that influences the soul to try to lord it over the material nature. So Arjuna, although he was so qualified, after hearing about the Astanga Yoga system of controlling the mind, he said that Chanchalam Himana Krishna, Pramati Balavadridam, Tasyaham Nigraham Manye, Vahyor Eva Sadiskriram. It is very difficult to control the restless mind, or Chanchalam Himana Krishna. My dear, first in the previous verse, Arjuna says, my dear Krishna, the system of yoga which was explained to me is very difficult, because it is very difficult to control the restless mind. Because the mind is restless, turbulent, and very strong, O Krishna, and to subdue it, it seems to be more difficult than trying to control the wind. So Krishna doesn't disagree with Arjuna. He says, Shri Bhagavan Vacha, Asamshaya Mahavaho, Manodar Nigraham Chalam, Abhyasena Tukuntiya, Vairagena Chigriyate. It is undoubtedly very difficult to control the restless mind, Arjuna, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. So what is that suitable practice? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge who our leader is, because the activities of the leader determine what is suitable practice. Now, in our ISKCON society, as we theoretically accept that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the goal of life is to obtain Krishna, so theoretically, anyone in the ISKCON society, if they want to actually take full advantage of the society, has to accept the founder Acharya as the leader, as the example of a pure devotee that one has to follow in order to become a pure devotee oneself. In other words, his instructions and example are the basic principle for anyone in the society to become a pure devotee of Krishna. If one does not accept a devotee such as Srila Prabhupada, who is simply explaining about the science of Krishna consciousness, then the question is, why would one be in ISKCON? In other words, if Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are not one's goal, and one thinks that there's a better way, even if one accepts these three things as one's goal, to realize we're eternal, to actually become a sincere follower of Paramatma within our heart, to be a surrendered soul, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, that he does exist within our heart as a super soul. Ishvara sarvabhutanam hrideshe Arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarvabhutani yantra rudani maya. That the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Tam eva sharnam gacha sara bhavena bharata tat prasadam param shantim stanam prapasti shastradam. Surrender unto him in all respects, O Arjuna, because by his mercy one can obtain transcendental peace in the eternal abode. So if we don't accept Paramatma as our guide, and what he wrote as in his form of Krishna and Bhagavad Gita is our guide, if we don't accept those who are explaining to us how to understand, how to accept Paramatma and Bhagavad Gita as our guide, then who will we accept? What is our goal? What is our purpose? And if we think that someone like Srila Prabhupada, who's completely dedicated to distributing Bhagavad Gita, writing Bhagavad Gita, distributing it, living accordingly to it, preaching about it, is not our suitable, that there's some other better guide or guides for us, then Vyavasaya Bhogaishvaya Prasaktanam Taya Prita Chetasam Vyavasayatmaka Buddhi Samadona Vidyate. For those whose minds are attached to material sense gratification and material opulence, then the resolute determination for devotional service will not take place. So our first business is at least theoretically accept that the goal is Krishna, and at the same time accept that our standard of how to become conscious of Krishna and our example of who became Krishna, who is Krishna conscious, and the instructions how to become Krishna conscious are there in Srila Prabhupada's books, his instructions, and his example. That's what ISKCON is meant for. That's why Srila Prabhupada is considered the founder Acharya. And if we think that someone is better, well, if we think that the goal of life is not to obtain Krishna, but something else, then there's no need to be part of the ISKCON movement, which is supposed to be dedicated for that. And if we think that there's someone better to obtain Krishna than Srila Prabhupada, his example, his instructions, then why be in ISKCON? There's so many movements. So that's the basis. In other words, if we accept whatever we're doing, the basis of it is to follow Prabhupada's instructions and example, etc., then we'll think about Srila Prabhupada. And if we think about Srila Prabhupada, then we'll perform the activities that are conducive to become conscious of Krishna. Just like Srila Prabhupada has given us the morning program, whether we're in the temple or outside the temple, to whatever degree we can follow it, it's auspicious. Because these are the 5 powerful processes that Srila Rupa Goswami, as the Acharya of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, has given us in the Nectar of Devotion, or Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Namely, to rise early in the morning and have an artik, and in general to worship the deities. What early is depends upon, of course, our physical strength and our occupation and other factors, but as early as possible, but at least start the day as soon as possible with worshiping the deities. Then also, above everything in this age, regular chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, especially trying to chant like Srila Prabhupada with attention and love, the love of a child calling for its mother, is most effective to get Krishna's attention, to become conscious of Krishna. If we don't care whether Krishna comes or not into our existence, whether or not we become conscious of him, then we can chant Hare Krishna on japa or wherever, and it may be some musical song, but Krishna, he knows our sincerity, he knows how much we actually want to associate with him, and he'll reciprocate with us accordingly. But Srila Prabhupada was very serious. He was in the mood that he was completely dependent upon Krishna. As he said, he was the acharyas, the best devotees addicted to Krishna, because he was actually in love with Krishna. as Virjan Prabhu, one of Prabhupada's disciples, said that when he was in Hong Kong, they had a program with Srila Prabhupada at some Indian conference. And in the conference there was one Mayavadi sannyasi who was also scheduled to give a talk at the same time. So Prabhupada sat there listening very carefully to what the Mayavadi sannyasi was saying, and then he started to talk Mayavadi philosophy. And Prabhupada became so disturbed, he told his disciples, "Stop him! Stop him!" So devotees didn't know what to do. This is many years ago. So the devotee stood up and started to do kirtan during his lecture. And Burjan Prabhu's remark was that when Prabhupada was disturbed, it wasn't like he was angry. It was like he was concerned about his someone he loved very dearly was being insulted. It wasn't in the mood of simply anger or frustration. It was a mood of being disturbed because someone very beloved to him was being insulted. So that mood of love to Krishna has to be developed through the process that Prabhupada has given us. Because the less we're disturbed by other desires and other activities, then the more we can concentrate our mind upon Krishna. And the more we concentrate our mind on the holy name, especially in the mood of a pure devotee who feels dependent on Krishna and his devotees, especially Srimati Radharani and the Acharya, then the result is that when Krishna reveals himself in proportion to one's sincerity of wanting to become conscious of him. And also, we should hear Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, to learn about Krishna and his devotees, how under all different circumstances they interact with each other so that they spread Krishna consciousness, or they become conscious of Krishna, and also spread Krishna consciousness to others, like Prahlad Maharaj. That he not only focused his mind upon Krishna in all circumstances, but also, when the opportunity was there, he distributed Krishna consciousness to his classmates appropriately. And of course, we should also try to live in a holy place, or make a place holy by bringing Krishna consciousness there. Like Maharaj Vidura, wherever he went, Maharaj Yudhisthira said that he turned that place into a place of pilgrimage, because not only Maharaj Vidura was present, but within his heart, Krishna, his devotees, the spiritual world was there, and therefore, in a practical way, wherever Maharaj Vidura went, then the place became spiritualized by the presence of the spiritual world. So that's our principal means of distributing Krishna consciousness, not only theoretically to others, because that will also help give people some transcendental intelligence, but also to have Prabhupada and our acharyas, and through them the six Goswamis, the Panchatattva, and ultimately be absorbed in their feelings of separation from Krishna and his associates, the spiritual world, to have those activities going on within our heart to whatever degree we can. And therefore, wherever we go, we spiritualize, the atmosphere becomes spiritualized by the presence of Krishna and his associates. That's how we can most effectively spread Krishna consciousness. That higher taste, when people experience it, that actually attracts them to participate in Krishna's service. Theoretically telling people that they're not their body, or that Krishna is God, is nice, And maybe a very few intellectual people will appreciate that enough to take up the process. But actually, when people feel Krishna's presence and the presence of his devotees, the spiritual energy, they become inspired to actually take that spiritual energy within their hearts so they can bring it wherever they are. And of course, the last thing is to serve the devotees. But service, the root of service to the devotees is service to the Mahabhagavats, to the Uttamadhikari devotee, who actually knows, not only knows, but has the experience of loving service to Krishna and his devotees. In other words, he doesn't serve the devotees simply as an intellectual exercise, as a result of gaining transcendental knowledge, but he serves them out of pure love, out of love for Krishna and love for his of his spiritual master. He serves all the devotees. Not only the devotees, but he serves the innocent people. And ultimately, such a Mahabhagavat is qualified even to do good to the non-devotees, those who are not necessarily very much appreciative of Krishna or his devotees. Therefore, one has to see not only that this movement is composed, principally the root is Srila Prabhupada, and through him we gain access through his deep devotion to his spiritual master and the acharyas in our disciple succession, and through them we gain access to the six Goswamis, to the Panchatattva, and ultimately we're able to experience their feelings of loving separation from Krishna and his associates in Vrindavan. And by such deep, deep meditation, we're able to actually enter into Vrindavan ourselves and experience what Vrindavan existence is actually like. And the Acharya, such as Srila Prabhupada, his instructions manifest themselves in this world in the form of a movement like ISKCON, which is a result of his spiritual energy, the spiritual energy coming through disciple succession, the instructions and the transcendental experience being conveyed into this world and manifesting a movement which is made of different devotees who have been influenced by the spiritual energy and therefore also act as instruments for the spiritual energy in the degree that they're receptive. Now, receptive, as Krishna says, anyone who's receptive to even a small degree is also under the spiritual energy. But the spiritual energy may not be as intense in a beginning devotee as in a perfect devotee. As Krishna says to Arjuna, that I'm the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although most people don't believe that or are not prepared to accept it. Therefore he says, Abhijananti mamuda manushim tamam asritam parambhavam ajanato mama bhuta maheshwaram. That the fools, they deride at my descending in this human form. They do not know my transcendental nature and my supreme dominion over all that be. So most people are not prepared to accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As a matter of fact, most people, they either don't know about Krishna, or if they do know about Krishna, they have no faith in him. They have no faith in Krishna or the spirit or the literature, the Vedic literature about Krishna. And even if they have some faith in the Vedic literature, and even in Krishna, they're not prepared to actually serve Krishna. Why? Because they think Krishna is just an ordinary person. Maybe extraordinary, but ordinary. After all, it is not so easy for a person who's not seriously engaged in devotional service to realize or even appreciate that Krishna comes as a either a kshatriya on the battlefield, Kurukshetra, or as a cavalry boy in Vrindavan. So because they don't accept that God could be a warrior, serving his devotee on a battlefield, they don't accept Bhagavad Gita as an absolute expression of reality, spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead on a battlefield. What to speak of accepting that his activities as a cavalry boy, herding cows in Vrindavan, are the absolute reality. That God dances, he steals butter, he herds cows. This is far beyond the majority of the people's ability to comprehend, what to speak of appreciate. Therefore, Krishna says, Mogaisha moga karmano moga jnana vichetasaha rakshasim asrim chaiva prakriti mohanim shita. That those who don't accept these things, Krishna's instructions of Bhagavad Gita as the absolute truth, nor Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan as the highest expression of the absolute truth, that although they may cultivate knowledge from the Vedic literature even, although they may engage in many pious activities, although they may be engaged in severe austerities to attain liberation, they'll all be mogasha. Mogasha means that their goals will be frustrated. They won't actually achieve what they want through these activities. They won't get perfect knowledge. They won't get perfect happiness eternally. They'll get some substitute for it by their endeavor, temporarily. But Krishna says, Mahatmanas tumam parta devim prakritim ashitya bhajanna nanyamanaso gyatva avhyam. Those who are great souls, who are under the spiritual energy, they're fully engaged in my service because they know me as the Supreme Lord, eternal and indestructible. And what are their activities? Sadadham kirtayantam mam yatantas chadrada vrataha namasyantas sumam bhaktya niktuto pasade. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. So those who are in the Krishna consciousness movement, in the beginning they're hearing about Krishna's glories, they're chanting Krishna's glories. And by doing so, they're under the spiritual energy. They may not be 100% consistently under the spiritual energy. Or Srila Prabhupada told Brahmananda Prabhu at the beginning of the movement, he said, the only difference between you and me is that I cannot fall down, but you can. In other words, anyone who's chanting Hare Krishna, he's under the protection of the spiritual energy. Sometimes he may slip, and his consciousness may change into something material, but as long as he regularly practices Krishna consciousness, gradually he'll advance to the platform of Drita Vrata, to the attempt at least to become free from anarthas, to become fixed with determination in devotional service. At that stage, there's more consistency and more intensity of devotional practice and meditation in Krishna consciousness. And therefore Krishna gives such a devotee more and more intelligence by which one can make advancement in devotional service. He makes it clearer to the devotee what practices are conducive, how to take shelter of the pure devotees, and therefore learn from them what practices, by their example and instructions, how to nicely perform devotional service, and at the same time give up habits which are not conducive to devotional service or meditation on Krishna. Then, in such a determined state of mind to become liberated from material existence, when one achieves liberation, then the next stage of intensifying one's activities and meditation on Krishna becomes more prominent. Namasyantasmam bhaktya. One becomes more and more dependent on Krishna, one more and more feelingly engaged in devotional service to please Krishna and his acharya, and therefore he achieves perfect Krishna consciousness after some time of going through the stages of ruchi, asakti, bhava, and prema, and beyond. Therefore, any devotee who's engaged in devotional service under the directions of an acharya like Srila Prabhupada should at least be respected within the mind, although sometimes if one is not so serious and performing some activities which are undesirable, one should not intimately associate with them. And those devotees who are actually striving for liberation from material concepts of life and working under the guidance of the acharya should be cooperated with in their endeavor to become conscious of Krishna and to distribute Krishna consciousness to others. And for those who are most advanced, who actually have feelings towards Krishna, transcendental loving feelings, and are acting simply to help others develop those feelings also, that activities which will lead to those feelings, and who want to help them develop their love and consciousness of Krishna, they should be followed in the example, because they're following the acharya in such a way as they're coming to the perfectional stage. So their example and instructions should be seen as a manifestation of the acharya's mercy, and therefore remembering them and remembering the acharya, one should act suitably to become to that stage also. So in other words, in our society, Srila Prabhupada has manifested himself in the form of this movement. The Krishna has manifested himself in the form of this movement through the acharyas, which are presently represented by Srila Prabhupada. And everyone in the society is a manifestation. Their activities in devotional service and Krishna consciousness are manifestations of Srila Prabhupada's mercy and instructions and his example. And therefore, because of that, or the more we become aware of that, the more we appreciate that, the more we become determined to follow that, the example and instructions of Srila Prabhupada, the more we become instruments for serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his transcendental movement, so that we become Krishna conscious and we become effective at giving Krishna consciousness to others. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Shri Ananga Manjari Devidasi.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Thank you so much
Hare.
for the one. Thank you for the wonderful class. Guru Maharaj, I have like a technical question. I cannot unraise the hand. Sorry for it. Okay. So, Atyahara. Atyahara is only material activities, or Atyahara can also refer to like excess, if we can say excessive spiritual activities. For example, if we are just like we want to do so much, but we cannot maintain it. Is this We want to do so much spiritually, but we cannot maintain it. Is this also considered Atyahara, or just Rajaguna or something else?
Well, in the verse, thank you for the question. In the verse, Sri Rupa Goswami says, Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo nimagraha jana sangasaloyam cha shadvir bhakti vinashiti. So atyahara is usually eating too much or collecting too much. Now, as a result of wanting to eat too much or collect too much, then generally there's prayasas. The prayasas means over-endeavoring beyond what our capacity is. Generally that atyahara, eating too much, maybe, or collecting too much, maybe, as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, for some mundane reason, such as Lord Chaitanya said that Nadanamna janamna sundarim kavitam vajagri shakamaye mama janmani janmanishware bhavatad bhakti ahaitu kitvaye. I don't want wealth, I don't want followers, I don't want beautiful women or men, I don't want liberation, I simply want your devotional service. So sometimes maybe because of of trying to satisfy our desires for things that we don't really need. Therefore, like eating too much, that we have an emotional desire, but it can't be satisfied, or it's satisfied something by eating. We want sweetness, and therefore prasadam is sweet, and therefore we feel some sweetness or satisfaction by eating more globulins than we actually can digest properly. At least temporarily we feel some sweetness. And because of that, globulins cost money, and we have to greatly endeavor in order to assure that we get them. We have to get some money, we have to work hard, we have to, whatever. So one follows the next. The aim is to get some sweetness, and when we find something that's sweet, we sometimes take too much of it. And then in order to pay for that, we have to over-endeavor. So sometimes we're frantically engaged in even devotional service, going from one thing to the next, because we feel that by doing so, then I become qualified to get the sweetness in some way of devotional service. But we miss out on the actual sweetness, which has become conscious of Krishna. And therefore we take something external other than Krishna consciousness as the source of the sweetness, although it may be including in some way consciousness of Krishna, but it may also include some things which may distract us from becoming conscious of Krishna. So therefore, for instance, to become conscious of Krishna, we have to chant with attention. But we may not be prepared to do that because our minds are so distracted by trying to find something sweet. But we don't have enough faith that if I pay attention, although it may be bitter at the beginning, at the end it'll be sweet, the sweetness I'm actually looking for. So we have to develop faith that if I actually take seriously the chanting of the holy names or hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, then the sweetness that I'm hankering for will actually be there. And I should try to tolerate the demands of my mind for sweetness so I can concentrate on the source that would actually be very sweet, although it appears bitter at first. Prabhupada gives the example that when you have, or Rupa Goswami gives the example, that when you have jaundice, that when you eat something sweet, it tastes bitter. But the cure for the jaundice is to eat the sweet And therefore, gradually, the jaundice will be cured, and one will actually taste the sweetness of the thing that we're eating that's sweet. So if we concentrate on the holy name and chant with as much attention and feeling as we can, in spite of our minds disturbing us, then the result is that we'll become purified, and one day we'll experience that the sweetness we're actually looking for is there in the holy name and in the Bhagavatam, etc. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you so much, Guru Maharaj. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Local Guru Das.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, thank you for your nice class and sharing your realization. Can you comment or give us insight on the following situation? So in one situation, if a devotee he accepts Srila Prabhupada as the full shelter and he accepted as a acharya, but at the same time, he's bypassing the system, like the guru system Prabhupada gave us. So what is his destination of this devotee, or can you just give insights on this question?
Yeah, as I said, if we will actually accept Prabhupada, then we have to accept his energies also. In other words, Prabhupada was not only present in the form of his name, his form, his quality, his pastimes, and his instructions in his books, or as his deity form, he's also manifested as his followers. So if we think his followers are something, those who are sincerely following Prabhupada's instructions, an example, are something different from Prabhupada, to the degree that they're following, then our understanding is only partial of who Srila Prabhupada is, or how he's present. What is his destination? That I don't know. You have to, depends on his state of consciousness at the time of leaving the body. But certainly his consciousness is incomplete. Or as Prabhupada used to say, if you love me, then you'll love my dog. So if we think that the devotees are those who are following the Acharya and under the same spiritual energy to different degrees as the Acharya are not manifestations of the Acharya's mercy, then our mercy, the mercy we get is only going to be very limited. Of course, we have to learn what is the Acharya's mercy and who's manifesting it to what degree, so we can respect them and serve them appropriately. But as soon as we're not aware of the different degrees of manifestation of the Acharya through his followers, and we neglect them, what to speak of criticize them, then at once we fall into the platform of aparad. And we won't be able to chant the holy name with any feeling, and therefore we certainly won't be eligible to go back to the spiritual world. Therefore, one of the offenses is the blasting the devotees who dedicated their lives in propagation of the holy name of the Lord. We're supposed to serve them. So if we don't understand these 10 offenses, and we just say Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Just like Prabhupada was in Hawaii, and some devotees came to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, we accept you as our authority, but we cannot accept the GBC. So Prabhupada's response was that my instruction is that you accept the GBC and follow him. And the devotees said, no, but Prabhupada, you don't understand that we accept you as our authority, but we cannot follow the GBC. So Prabhupada said that my instruction is that you follow the GBC. And the devotees, third time, they said, well, Prabhupada, we understand that you tell us we should follow the GBC, but we can't do that. We can only follow your instructions. So Prabhupada hit his fists on the table and said, get out of here, hypocrites. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, anything else? If not, then we can stop here. Thank you very much. Granthara Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanande Haribol.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Guru Maharaj.
Gracias.
Hare
Thank
Krishna,
you.
Maharaj.
Gracias, Guru
Hare
Maharaj.
Krishna devotees.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Kumari. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Lavangalata Mataji, for translating. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Kumar.